The honourable member from Thornhill.
We already know that the Prime Minister is not worth the cost, and after 8 years, this Prime Minister is no longer even listening to Canadians. A 23% carbon tax hike in the face of Canadians who can't afford to eat. Yesterday, this House passed a Conservative common sense motion calling on him to convene an emergency televised carbon tax meeting with all 14 premiers. The Prime Minister is hiding, but maybe someone over there can tell us what day will the televised carbon tax meeting be.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, today we are debating Bill C-50, the Sustainable Jobs Act, which the Royal Bank of Canada says there are 400,000 of to come to Canadians if we were just to unlock the kind of prosperity envisaged in this very progressive piece of legislation. Instead, the Conservatives put forward 20,000 amendments generated by artificial intelligence. The Robo Caucus needs to stop its robo work with its robo amendments and stop gatekeeping the opportunities that are coming to Canadians.
What?
The honourable member from Thornhill.
It's false, and that wasn't an answer. Canadians need relief and not more liberal taxes. 70% of Canadians are now saying so. 1 in 10 people in Toronto are now relying on a food bank, and more than half of Canadians are $200 away from missing their bills. If they aren't going to listen to Canadians, if they aren't going to give us a date, perhaps the member can tell us what channel will the carbon tax meeting be on.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the channel they should be plugged in, I don't know what it is, but it is the reality channel, because back here in the real world, there are real jobs at stake, there are real opportunities at stake, there is affordability at stake, and these members, the Robo Caucus, with their Robo amendments, in the way of opportunity and the way of progress and clean technology in this country, they need to get out of the way, stop the gatekeeping, let Canadians create the wealth that we need to succeed.
The gatekeeper is you, man.
The honourable member from Thornhill.
Once again, he didn't answer the question, and I'm not really sure what that was. But if he won't listen to Canadians, and they won't listen to their NDP caucus, the Prime Minister won't listen to his successor, Mark Carney, who also wants him to meet with premiers. They won't give us a date. They won't give us a time. They won't tell us what channel to watch. The Prime Minister won't even show up here and answer to this motion. The Prime Minister is being defiant when Canadians are lining up at food banks in record numbers. What are you covering for?
Well put.
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has repeatedly said he is all ears. If there is a better plan, put it on the table. Premier Moe himself said this was the most cost-effective plan, and that's why our government will keep going with it while maintaining our AAA credit rating, while maintaining the lowest debt-to-GDP ratio in the G7, and while maintaining historically low unemployment. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we will always vote with Canadians and support them along the way. Thank you.
The honourable member for Bellechasse-les-Outremer-Lévis. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, we've suffered a passport crisis, an increase in violent crime, the doubling of rent costs, millions of people going to food banks, and criminals in our very homes. That's a great record. Quebecers are suffering because of this government's mismanagement, and now it's invading provincial jurisdictions. Will the Prime Minister listen to the Premier of Quebec, who is asking to finally mind his own business? The Honourable Minister for Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Six. This guy
Six affordable housing units. That's what the Leader of the Opposition built when he was Minister for Housing. Throughout Canada and throughout his mandate, with the collaboration of the Government of Quebec and hand in hand with municipals, 8,000 units will be built over the next few weeks. I would like to invite my colleague, the member for
$9.50 average in Canada,
to come with me to visit a
They didn't need to build affordable housing units because housing was affordable.
Where
you didn't need to fix the problem if there wasn't a problem in the first place.
For that unit and that project, the honourable member for Bellechasse-les-Outremer-Lévis. To the already long list of
Holy
failures
smokes.
of this Liberal government, we can add a total slackness in the management of public finances and the squandering of Quebecers' money. The government spends Canadians' money indiscriminately. It has no budgetary discipline over the past 8 years, and as a result, the debt is doubling. It has not balanced a budget, and then it wants to manage the province's affairs and lecture them.
Blink?
Quebec Premier François Legault is adamant that this federal government should finally mind its own business. Will the government listen to him, yes or no?
There he goes. MP Duncan, you okay, bro?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons. Mr. Speaker, let us talk about a former Premier of Quebec, Mr. Scheer, with whom this very member sat and voted for a pollution pricing system. And so I think that the hypocrisy from that side is rather striking, especially in a context where today we're talking about 400,000 potential jobs in Canada, thanks to green technology, thanks to our new economy. That member is against these kind of opportunities in battery factories in Quebec, for example. On this side of the House, we are for opportunities for Quebecers, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. The housing issue proves that the federal government must be prevented from interfering in Quebec's area of jurisdiction. When the federal government decides where the money goes, Quebecers get done dirty. CMHC figures prove it in black and white. Since the creation of the federal housing strategy in 2019, do you know, Mr. Speaker, how much of the funding Quebec has received? When it's the federal government that chooses projects? 6.7%, Mr. Speaker. 6.7% isn't even a third of our fair share, Mr. Speaker. Will the government stop shortchanging Quebecers and transfer all the housing money unconditionally to Quebec? The Honourable Minister for Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've already talked about the 6 housing units of the Conservative leaders. So now let's talk about the 8,000 affordable housing units, thanks to the leadership and the partnership between us and the province of Quebec and various municipalities in Quebec. The member for Salaberry-sur-Roi, in her riding, is no doubt aware of the Pédalo housing project with 48 accessible and affordable housing units that are adapted to climate change. That will bring real difference for dozens of people in her riding. I would be happy to go to that housing unit project with her to show her how important our collaboration is with Quebec and for the people of her riding. The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Quebecers constitute 20% of the population of Canada, and we receive 6.7% of federal investment in housing. When it's the federal government that chooses projects, so you don't need to be a math whiz, Mr. Speaker, to figure out that we are being absolutely ripped off. Since 2019, the money has been used mainly to fund projects outside of Quebec. We are in the midst of a housing crisis, Mr. Speaker, and we are paying through our taxes to house Ontarians while we can no longer afford in Quebec to pay the rent here at home. Do you now understand, Mr. Speaker, why we need to keep the federal government as far away as possible from our exclusive jurisdiction over housing? The Honourable Minister for Public Services and Procurement. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I understand that the Bloc Québécois perhaps doesn't appreciate good collaboration between the Quebec government and the federal government, but we've signed an agreement just a few weeks ago, an 8,000 affordable housing unit agreement, which is the biggest investment in affordable housing ever seen in Quebec, in all of Quebec's history. And that is because the government of Quebec and the federal government are working together in order to allow Quebecers and other Canadians access to affordable housing. The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Mr. Speaker, Montreal has seen its highest rent increase in 30 years. A true crisis that is preventing Montrealers from finding a roof under which to live. And what is the Liberal government's solution to this? To build only 35% of affordable and social housing units in the Wellington Basin. So that means offering 2/3 of housing that is not affordable. Simple question. Why use public land to build housing that Quebecers cannot afford? The Honourable Minister for Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Very happy to hear this question from my colleague. It shows once again the contrast that exists between this government And the previous government in 2017, we implemented our first national strategy with regards to housing in our country's history, so that we can, which is a contrast to the Conservative leader who, when he was housing minister during his entire term and throughout the country, only built 6 affordable, Mr. Speaker, 6 affordable housing units.
Because there wasn't a housing problem when he was housing minister.
The honourable member from London.
Houses were affordable.
The women and men in the Canadian Armed Forces have faced a military housing shortage for decades. Under Liberals and Conservatives, military housing has not been built and existing units are falling into disrepair. And now the Liberals want our armed forces to wait another 2 years before they even start building homes. This delay is unacceptable. Why is the minister delaying building urgently needed homes for the men and women who serve our country?
Honourable Minister for National Defence.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and making sure that we provide adequate supports, particularly for housing and childcare, is absolutely essential for us to support the men and women who serve in Canadian Armed Forces. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, in our recently released defence policy, we've included a substantial investment of over $300 million to build housing. But, Mr. Speaker, that work has begun and will continue apace. And I look forward to working with all members of the Defence Committee as we bring forward important new initiatives to support the men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces.
The honourable member from Regina Capel.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is just not worth the cost, and now his carbon tax scheme is completely falling apart. First, his own budget watchdog proved conclusively that most Canadians are worse off even with the rebate. Then he was humiliated into granting a partial carve-out because his Liberal MPs were sick of the backlash they were getting from their voters. And now a majority of premiers are demanding an emergency carbon tax conference to put forward better ideas than his punishing tax. If he's so sure that his carbon tax is so good, then why doesn't he just sit down and listen to the Premier?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Mr. Speaker, later today we will be voting to advance the Sustainable Jobs Act. It is a critically important act in the context of growing an economy that will thrive in a low-carbon future. It will ensure that workers and environmental organizations have a seat at the table when we are discussing Canada's Green Economic Plan. The Conservatives have obstructed at every turn.
Oh, whoa. What's going on here?
Vandalism.
Okay.
Before I
had a little bit of a
Before I pass on the floor to the honourable member from Regina Capel, I'll ask all members, please only the members who do have, who are recognized by the Speaker to let their opinions be known. The honourable member from Regina Capel.
Well, Mr. Speaker, none of that is true. But what is true is that yesterday, in a historic vote, a majority of MPs demanded that the Prime Minister sit down and just listen to the premiers. It's baffling to understand why he's so afraid of meeting with them. It's not like they're going to ask him to put together IKEA furniture or help them move. They just want to put forward better ideas than hiking prices on everything. Yes. What is he so afraid of? Is it Doug? Is it Blaine? I know Scott Moe, Mr. Speaker. He's a really nice guy. Why doesn't the Prime Minister just meet with him?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, Scott Moe said he sat down and pored over the data and could not possibly find a more effective way to combat GHG emissions than this government's policy on pricing pollution. You know, right now, today in this House, we are discussing untold employment and economic opportunity for Canadians, including the people of Regina Capel. If he won't stand up for the workers at Regina Capel, we will, Mr. Speaker.
Scott Moe said he couldn't figure out any way to justify the carbon tax.
And I'll invite the House Leader to come out to Regina, and Scott Moe and I can have a beer, and we can figure out what Scott really said about the carbon tax. Just last week, this Prime Minister raised the carbon tax by 23%. That increased the price of gas, groceries, and home heating for all Canadians. Mr. Speaker, I am unsure of why this Prime Minister is so scared to meet with all the premiers. 6, 7, 8 premiers want to meet with the Prime Minister and see what he has to say about his flagship carbon tax policy. Why won't he listen, or does he just not care?